I've been meaning to start this channel for a while. The reason for doing so are legion, but my delay is singular. There's simply been too much going on to even let my thoughts settle, except on a few occasions. But recent events have pushed me to take some time to collect my thoughts on some of the goings-on in this country. A few days ago, a series of events culminated in the death of an American patriot, Heather Heyer. She was participating in a counter-protest in the city of Charlottesville, Virginia, when the group of protesters that she was a part of was driven into by a Dodge Charger. The collision of the vehicle with the crowd resulted in her death and injuries of many more. At this time, the police have in custody the suspected driver of the vehicle and the owner of the same, James Alex Fields Jr. of Ohio. At the time of the writing of this script for this video, her death is the only one for which I'm aware. There are others from the events of that weekend that at present are near death's door. Heather posted on Facebook on November 19th, 2016 the following quote, "If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention." And she is correct. I understand how difficult it is for Benny to pay attention given the volume of information that's out there and urgently relevant. Difficulty, though, is not an excuse. Democracy requires an informed electorate in order to prosper, and so, in my day-to-day, I do my part to keep both myself informed and help others do the same. But that effort has grown considerably more difficult over time. More than it should, from just having a more connected world. If anything, having better access to the primary sources of news, current events, and even the actual text of legislation passing through Congress online should make being well-informed easier. It has also made disinformation campaigns much easier. Back to Charlottesville. The counter-protest for which Heather Heyer and others were participating in was in opposition to the demonstration called Unite the Right. The stated purposes of a Unite the Right rally are diverse, to say the least, but they are generally breaking down into two general groups. Opposition to the planned removal of a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee, and a solidarity march for various white nationalists and white supremacist groups for the purposes of uniting them into a more cohesive and dangerous force, and generally trying to unite them under the general banner of the alt-right. Both these reasons should concern the vast majority of people in this country. But it wasn't the only reason that they were there. The Unite the Right rally, like all white supremacist rallies held in public, was meant to not just bring them members together, but also to intimidate and harm those in the area who are not on board with their agenda. To the hearts of the residents of the city of Charlottesville, and if opportunity presents itself, to bring harm upon those that he oppose. Unite the Right was not a rally to foster dialogue over monuments. The monument was an excuse to present a show of force to the city and the nation, a demonstration that white supremacists were organized and able to project harm upon anyone, anywhere. That's why they came with bats and shields. That's why they came with body armor. That's why they came with machine guns. That's why they attacked the peaceful counter-protesters. That's why they attacked lines of churchgoers singing hymns. And that's why James Alex Fields Jr. of Ohio drove his car into a crowd of people. It's not free speech when your message is violence. James Alex Fields Jr. of Ohio came to Virginia to hurt people. That was the purpose of the rally. That is the purpose of unifying the right-wing white supremacist organizations, bringing KKK and Nazis and polo-wearing internet trolls together under one big racist, Trump-loving umbrella. And that is the purpose of defending the statue. That's why they were there. The Lee statue in Charlottesville was commissioned by Paul McIntyre in 1917. The pedestal is inscribed with Robert Edward Lee and the years 1807 and 1870, the years of General Robert E. Lee's birth and death respectively. It should be noted that McIntyre was age 10 in 1870, and thus was unlikely to have been a close personal friend of Lee, nor are the figures depicted by the other statues he commissioned, who are all dead before McIntyre was born, while in the case of Confederate General Stonewall Jackson, died before Lee. I mention this because I want to make sure no one tries to start claiming that the guy who commissioned the statues was somehow the best buddy of Robert E. Lee on a personal level, or was even one of his soldiers. The Lee statue was forged in 1924. It was commissioned back in 1917, and its completion also happened to coincide with the period of American history when the Ku Klux Klan, aka the KKK, was having its resurgence. This is known by some as the Second Klan. Second Klan was founded in 1915 by William Joseph Simmons, along with a group of 15 so-called charter members who had been emboldened by the film The Birth of a Nation to revitalize the KKK. They met in November of 1915 at Stone Mountain in Georgia to begin the new Second Klan, and were later given permission by the owner, a guy named Sam Venable, to meet and celebrate there whenever they liked. This agreement ended in 1960 when the land was purchased by the state of Georgia. But well before that, Sam Venable, who had close association with the KKK, was also given part of the mountain to the United Daughters of the Confederacy in 1916 for the purposes of carving a Confederate memorial upon the mountain face via a 12-year lease. After various troubles and the purchasing of the mountain at the behest of the segregationist governor of Georgia, the monument was eventually completed in 1972. The latter period of work also corresponded to the civil rights era of the 1960s and 70s, where society and laws in the U.S. began to bring an end to the explicit segregation and the establishment of protections for the civil rights of African Americans. It was also a period when the KKK engaged in a reign of terror in opposition to these changes, often supported by local and state governments. In other words, work on Confederate monuments has a nasty habit of happening during periods when the KKK is particularly active. Or, in other words, Confederate monuments appear when white supremacists are attempting to force their will upon society. That these monuments are a tool of their efforts to intimidate and rally like-minded individuals. And that's why they decided to use the purpose of the removal of a statue of Lee, a Confederate general from Charlottesville, as their focal point last weekend. Coming from all across the country to tell the people of the city that they couldn't remove the Lee statue without their say-so, that the people that live there had to bow to them. Never mind that there are lawsuits pending delaying the removal. Never mind that if the white supremacists wanted to take action on this issue, they could have participated in the legal process. They decided to gather from around the country to tell one city to stand down instead. And they did it through violence and intimidation, with chants, Nazi flags, clubs, guns, and cars. Unite the Right was all about white supremacists for demonstration of white supremacist power. They gathered up a coalition of thugs to beat their way towards political change in a city that a majority of them don't call home. This is the going into someone else's house to make them paint the walls gray, or else you'll punch them in the teeth school of politics. Or in other words, an invasion. The white supremacists, this alt-right alliance, invaded the city of Charlottesville, and they killed. The majority of the people standing up against the white supremacists of the Unite the Right were locals. They wanted to defend their city, defend their homes, businesses, schools, churches, synagogues, and streets from the white supremacists who sought to terrorize them. They wanted to defend their home. They wanted to defend their ability to be safe in their own community. They wanted to defend their ability to run their own city government according to the will of the voters. They wanted to defend their right to exist. The city of Charlottesville has already spoken on the issue of the statue. After the mass shooting in a church in Charleston, South Carolina, by Dylan Roof, a white supremacist, there had been movements in many states and cities to remove the Confederate symbols and monuments from public spaces. The city of Charlottesville had held a special commission to offer recommendations regarding the Confederate-associated landmarks and statues in the city. There was ample time for the citizens of the city to speak their mind, and these white supremacists could have easily channeled their bluster and faux angst over heritage, then, to their heart's content, gone to those commissions, spoke their mind. Or in the lead up to the vote by the democratically elected city council to remove the statue. By going to the meetings, writing letters, and otherwise participating in democracy, and then taking the loss as dignity. Or in other words, they did not need to kill Heather to save that stupid statue. But Unite the Right, the white supremacists, the alt-right, they wanted blood to demonstrate the seriousness of their message, and they got it. I don't use the term evil lightly. However, the white supremacists that came to Charlottesville to terrorize the city into submission are evil people. And yet, well, how should I put this? And yet, there are many people who are doing their best to deflect away from the white supremacists and the evil they do, to to a degree, I don't care the why of this deflection, though it can be informative as to the character of those doing the deflecting. Some deflect as they are given their Nazi salutes themselves. Some deflect because they really want to lower taxes or to abolish abortion, and thus anything that might make the Republican Party look bad needs to be crushed or covered up. They deflect because they just don't know what the hell's going on, and they can't be bothered to read a damn book, or do even the most basic research into current events. Some deflect because they would prefer that all the blame for anything bad goes entirely to the Democrats, because they just want to hurt liberals, people of color, women, or whatever other group of others that they have some bullshit beef with. As there's a lot of diversity in the reasoning for this deflection, it's not entirely useful to, at this particular moment, for me to dig into each one all at the same time. I might get into that in some later video. Instead, let's today focus on the tactic itself. The purpose of deflection is to reduce outrage at the obvious wrongdoing, to lessen backlash against those who perpetrated it, and to shift any penalties to either be applied to other parties as well, or entirely onto an opposing force. In this particular case, the opposing force of choice appears to be the Antifa, or anti-fascists. I've also seen some attempting to shift the blame for the violence to Black Lives Matters, communists, and a general alt-left, in giant quotation marks. Anti-fascists were by far not the only group in opposition. Other groups opposing Unite the Right included the National Council of Churches and Redneck Revolt, who I never heard of before, which is kind of interesting, so I might read more on them later. But anyway, neither of which seem to be mentioned when I see people trying to change the subject about what happened. Maybe because they don't know these groups exist. But most importantly, the bulk of the counter-protests were made up of members of the local community, including individuals in the faith, civil rights, business, and university communities. The Unite the Right organizations brought together a collection of white supremacist groups. And in response, the city of Charlottesville united in opposition. But the apologists for the alt-right seem really hung up on the anti-fascists. So if we're going to understand what is going on with the deflection, we need to poke a little at what Antifa, or anti-fascist, the movement is. That's perhaps more difficult than one might think. To a degree, there is only a couple things that really define anti-fascists. It's decentralized, meaning there's no leadership, so no central spokesperson, and it tends towards militancy, and opposing fascists and related ideologies just as the core guiding principle. It can be interpreted in a number of different ways. This means that when a group of neo-Nazis starts unveiling the swastikas, like what happened last week in the Unite the Right, the anti-fascists show up. There's a problem, however, in defining anti-fascists beyond that. Even beyond the murky origins in Europe and, back in the 1930s, where they, resisted the Third Reich and all that stuff. The lack of a singular manifesto, other than being against fascists, and intentional disorganization, the realities of politics in the United States at this point in the time is bringing a changing nature to the group as well. The more right-wing terrorism there is in America that goes unanswered by the swift justice of the government, the more people of a moderate left nature are being driven to reject the right and sign on with groups they might not otherwise associate with. And some of them do this by starting to self-identify as Antifa. So while the anti-fascists in the US of a few years ago, or even a few months ago, may have been of an extreme anarchist or anti-capitalist nature in general, though there is much debate even on that issue, that might not be the case anymore. And so I'm not willing at this point to try to pin down the exact ideology of the group beyond being against fascists. I can say that its base of support is growing as more sign on to its core message of opposing fascism and the related hate that drives its power. And Antifa will continue to grow as its members throw their bodies in the way of white supremacists charging at peaceful protesters. And that throwing themselves in the path of charging white supremacists is apparently what happened in Charlottesville, going by the first-hand accounts of the locals. The Antifa did take a more controversial approach to the white supremacists than the other groups, pushing forward to try to block the outright thugs from the more passive counter-protesters. And sometimes, when asked by those they sought to protect, they stood down, stepping back when asked by people of a more peaceful bent that, no, I don't want you getting violent over me. And they backed up, they got out of the way, and the white supremacists still attacked. This group that apparently is so bad that's the primary target of the defenders of the damn statue, disengaged when asked to by those who didn't want bloodshed. The anti-fascist movement folks on the street there showed their respect to the locals. The alt-right, the white supremacists, they did not. The white supremacists attacked them instead. Unite the Right put citizens of the city in the hospital and the morgue. Antifa was on the ground there, and yes, they were perhaps the most physically confrontational. Confrontational against a collection of hate groups and wannabe hate groups that practice the language of violence and confrontation as their core message. And that's the problem for the right in the country. Someone's standing up their bile in a way they're not used to, getting up in their face when they got up on everyone else's. In a way, they also think they can exploit this. They think that because Antifa has a militant nature with a history of property damage, that they can make them the bad guy, and thus keep the average voter from thinking about the fact that anti-fascists were facing down guys with automatic weapons carrying Nazi flags. And thus, Antifa seems like a group that they can turn into an acceptable target of hate by moderates. Hence the narrative of both sides, and the narrative of whataboutism. These are the two main deflections being put to use right now, but by far not the only two. Both sides is the most clearly cut to make use of Antifa as a foil. By casting the anti-fascists as an unreasonable, violent force, the right gets to avoid having to condemn the white supremacists explicitly. This is what President Trump has done. Well, he's also done the other one, but I'll get to that. The dissonance goes like this. You have two groups. One is already clearly unacceptable in the public mind, but for some reason, you want them to not get the full blame for the crimes they commit. So you find someone who opposes them that you can paint in the same light as a group you want to not be condemned by society. And then you play up the unacceptable nature of that opposition group. Oh, this may involve telling the truth, exaggeration, or outright lies. Whatever is necessary to, at the very least, bring parity to the hate between the two groups, independent of any actual facts. Most legwork in this case is being done through the usual right-wing channels in the media. So, traditional media such as Fox News and Sinclair Broadcasting, affiliated local broadcast stations, as well as the new media as well, various alt-right screechers on YouTube, Twitter, Breitbart. The collection of talking heads pushing this narrative to the masses through their mediums of choice to get everyone talking about how violent anti-fascists are. And then, when the President of the United States throws his hands up and goes, "Both sides!" enough people will accept it as a condemnation of what happened, and they won't mind that he didn't point out that Unite the Right was a white supremacist rally. That's part of how the right-wing echo chamber works. Well, not the only way, but that's other videos. The poison of hate leaks out against the group of choice, in this case, Antifa, and makes the unacceptable just acceptable enough for those that believe the president's agenda to keep on pretending that's okay that white supremacists are with them 100%. I mean, if the left's got their bat squad, why shouldn't we? And really, it's that appeasing of the not racist butt crowd that the president is focused on here. Even when he did stand up there and call out his supporters each individually by name who participated in the white supremacist rally, those white supremacists would still stand by him as they know he was secretly forced to say that by those nasty, conventional insiders around him. They'd not vote for any other Republican who wasn't overtly with them down ticket, though, as clearly it was those moderate Republicans who made the president do that. And Trump can't afford to have his racist base divorce itself from the Republican Party en masse. So he tried to appease both the overt racists, and those that are cool with racist voting Republicans into office over and over again, as long as their taxes are lowered. The technique naturally doesn't work on anyone who has any sense of what's actually going on. To anyone who watched the video of DeAndre Harris being beaten by a group of alt-right white supremacists, know who the bad guys are here. It wasn't Antifa, it wasn't the anti-fascists, it wasn't Black Lives Matter, and it sure as hell wasn't Harris, who was lucky to escape with his life. Hence the outrage over the president's hedging. But the president was also focused on some of his utterances on the Lee statue itself, going on about, if Lee is removed, where does it stop? Washington? Well, about that. The whataboutism argument is a type of logical fallacy, the extension of the slippery slope logical fallacy, and is usually stated in the general form, if we stop or start doing X, where does it stop? I mean, what about Y? Customize as you will for any particular situation where you don't have a very good argument. Another variant is, of course, yes, this is bad, but what about that other thing? I bring up the two variants as I'm seeing a bit of both right now. One to further the condemnations of anti-fascists, deflecting the arguments towards them, so that the speaker does not have to defend neo-Nazis. And the other about the statue itself. As I've already gone over the ridiculousness that is the effort to use Antifa as an anti-fascist, anti-racism movement in order for people and politicians to avoid talking about how bad, actual fascists and racists are, I'll focus on the other whataboutism being employed here. And this whataboutism is all about the statue itself. The Robert E. Lee statue, erected during the resurgence of the KKK, and slated for removal by the city of Charlottesville because they've had enough of Confederate symbols in their public spaces. It's being portrayed as the ultimate tool of historical knowledge. A statue of a guy on a horse, with the name of that guy on the pedestal, with his birth and death years, and I guess some sort of bird-themed crest I haven't had a good look at yet, on the one side. A statue with 3 pieces of information, a name, and 2 years. Nothing about who he was beyond this, what he did, what cause he fought for, that he fought to continue the institution of slavery by leading the Confederate armies, that he himself, through his wife, had a few slaves himself, that he was cool with his soldiers kidnapping people in Pennsylvania and enslaving them, that he was a traitor to the United States of America for taking up arms against it. None of that is listed there. None of that is on the statue or the pedestal. So really, in terms of historical value, this statue kinda sucks. Of course, as I did my best to make clear, the purpose of the statue isn't one of teaching history. It's to demonstrate who's really in charge. And even if it wasn't before, which it was, it's certainly become a rallying point for white supremacists now. There's no way that can be denied, given what's happened. Given that there's been, count them, 3 rallies to intimidate the locals into changing their minds about the statue's fate. Oh, I didn't mention the alt-right meetup in May? Or the KKK Happy Fun Times gathering back in July? Whoops. Guess given how much is going on and needs to be said, it slipped my mind. But yes, the statue is a symbol for the white supremacists. The intimidation they bring, and the oppression that they have supported in the past, including slavery and Jim Crow laws. And perhaps some of the stuff that's going on today, such as voter suppression. And so the city and residents of the city should have a right to remove the symbol of hate and oppression if they so choose. And they have. Statue is to be sold, assuming the court rules in the city's favor. If the alt-right wants themselves a Robert E. Lee statue, if the city, goes with the city's plan here, they can buy it. They can put it in their rec room. They can have it. So a statue of minimal historical value, that's the symbol of oppression, is being equated to now, what was it? What exactly? Mount Rushmore? The Washington Monument? Statues of Jefferson? others, I guess. Whataboutism, in this case, uses these and other monuments as the go-to hit list for the far left. Never mind that it's putting words in people's mouths. Let's take a step back and ask real quick, are these symbols of oppression, or have they become such, as rallying points for hate groups, thus making them de facto symbols of hate? Are they being rejected by people that have to live with them? Is there a useful historical reason for the monument that transcends the problems it might bring to a community? If the answer for all three of these particular questions is yes, then maybe it's time to get rid of them. Yeah. Sometimes this is done by the city government through legal means, such as the very recent removal of Confederate monuments in Baltimore as a response to the events in Charlottesville. Sometimes this is done via a group of citizens taking matters into their own hands, such as in Durham, when locals tore down a mass-produced Confederate monument that the state wouldn't allow them to remove. Or in Ukraine, in 2013 and 2014, when hundreds of statues of Lenin, that guy that was kind of the guy that is in charge of the Soviet Union back in the day, were torn down and destroyed by angry citizens who opposed the Russian interference in their government and elections. Funny that. It's almost like folks in the U.S. are angry about a corrupt pro-Russian president being installed and thus, in their fed-upness, are willing to tear down symbols of oppression in response. But I digress. The whataboutism would pretend that the Washington Monument is in equal danger as the Robert E. Lee statue. The statue that is to be sold, not destroyed. One of numerous Robert E. Lee statues and related monuments throughout the South. Unless you want Lee gone, you clearly are going to be coming after every other monument in the country, because everyone else who has a monument dedicated to them has problematic past of some sort. That argument doesn't pass the smell test. aka it's kinda stupid. Nazis aren't tossing salutes to statues of our first president, and Jefferson's mug isn't popping up in mass quantities throughout history whenever the KKK has a resurgence. Lee is, though. Stonewall Jackson is, though. And I'd be very surprised if there weren't cities in the South that are cool with the Confederate monuments, just kind of hanging out, and don't want to get rid of those. And when they grow up and recognize the symbols of these monuments and what they mean as far as, slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, all that nasty stuff, maybe they'll come to their senses. And yes, Mount Rushmore as a site has an unfortunate history in that it was kind of a land grab by the U.S. government from the Native Americans. And though I'd argue that it meets the historical test, not just about the presidents, but also the habit of government seizing land from the Native Americans, I understand that there is a debate there. And that's a debate we can engage in with clearer heads. Hopefully. It's Mount Rushmore, with the face of Lincoln on it. You don't get many white supremacists rallying around Lincoln, given that Lincoln was in charge of the North when they fought and won the Civil War. Yeah. And besides, as stated before, the defense of the Lee statue was an excuse for the white supremacist rally. It was the symbol of their message. Their excuse to terrorize a city with something, something, something history, something, something, something white power. And they had, several non-violent ways to oppose the removal. And they still do. So yeah, this defense, the whole purpose of the rally, is bunk. Absolute bunk. I blogged after the 2016 election about the betrayal of trust that occurred in American politics. As I'm not likely to continue my blogging proper-like, I won't link it, but I'll summarize. The 2016 election demonstrated that enough of the country had priorities beyond that of having a stable, liberty-supporting, and effective government. And they showed these priorities by electing an unstable, bigoted, and buffoon of a president. There were a lot of excuses. And like in the excuses were ignoring the evils of the alt-right white supremacists, they were and are absolute bunk as well. And because they are absolute bunk, the rest of us cannot trust a large section of the country anymore. We can't trust millions of people to do the right thing. We can't trust millions of people to stand up to incompetence. We can't trust millions of people to stand up against racism or sexism or homophobia. We cannot trust millions of people in this country to put their country before their party or ideology. They didn't have to vote for Clinton. They could have at least done us a solid and not voted for Trump. If they really wanted to support a Russian-loving crazy person, there was Stein. Or if normal head-scratching confusion is your thing, Johnson. And there were other people on the ballot. And if you don't want to vote for any of them, it's a free country. You could have opted not to. But no, you had to give us this. And there were enough people in just the right places to cause the Electoral College to fail the American people. And not enough Republicans with a conscience acting as electors to toss the presidency to the House so they could pick someone who wasn't prone to bending over backwards to play nice with actual Nazis. None of this had to happen. None of it. The alt-right white supremacist terrorists did not have to be emboldened, given a platform, and given their president. Yes, I will say it. President Donald Trump is the representative of white nationalism in the U.S. government. He is their guy. And his continued actions, the defense of those actions, and the defense of the alt-right by many of our fellow citizens means we cannot trust them still. I believe that people can be redeemed, that they can grow to escape the darkness of the world of hate, but that journey needs to start with them. There's nothing I can do to suddenly wave a magic wand and have them not want me and my friends dead. That's on them. That's a choice they have to make. And so far, there is some movement in terms of opinion polls. Some people, in fact now, most people now disapprove of the president by wide margins. But disapproval is only a hint. It's not a demonstration of rejection of this sort of thing. It's not a demonstration of the rejection of the hate. After all, that dislike might be because you don't think he's been cruel enough to Mexicans. Or something. I don't know. I'm not in these people's heads. Simply disapproving of the Orange Man is not enough to re-earn trust. It might be a start, but it's not enough. Rejecting the frames being pushed by the far-right to cover up their crimes does, however, help a bit more. As does publicly condemning white supremacists, their ideology, and their defenders. Calling people out for the use of deflections and rhetoric to try to shift anger to those who sought to defend the city and oppose hate. That helps. Pointing out the bullshit behind the, "Oh my historical landmarks, where will it end?" cries. That helps too. As well as, not using that argument yourself. But all of these things, but that's not enough. If the tide of white supremacy is to end in America, we have two and only two options. My preferred option is the complete and total defeat of these forces at the ballot box. Forever. Every election. Yes, every election. Local and national. State, federal, county, city, whatever. All of them. If you're electing a county soil conservation officer, auditor person, if the options being presented to you are a neo-Nazi against anything else, pretty much, vote for that anything else. Register to vote. Get your friends registered. And get everyone to the polling places and cast your votes against white supremacists and their apologists. To vote against those who would seek to damage our democracy. To vote against those who seek to keep people from voting because of their age, color of their skin, or their origin of their last name. To vote for those who will actually work for all America, not just the alt-right terrorist groups. Do what is needed for the rest of us to trust America again, while some shred of our democracy still remains intact. But if we fail the ballot box, and the white supremacists continue to grow their power in government, they will enact their oppressive agenda. That is their plan. They've stated it. Anyone else who opposes them would lose their vote, their property, and maybe their life, as the white supremacists dominate the government, courts, and all society. That's the nature of a white ethno-state that they claim they wish to enact. It's meant to exclude anyone they don't like from the life within the country, to strip rights, to hurt, to maim, to kill all of those that don't toe the party line. That is the nature of fascism. I have a great deal of faith in the American institutions to avoid this fate. However, that said, if we don't do what we must to keep them strong, then there is no point. America is only as strong and just as its people, and if we abandon her, we will lose her. Stay informed. Seek out the real story. Do your own research. Ask why someone's saying what they're saying, including me. Demonstrate in the streets when things get stupid. And counter-protest when the alt-right shows up with their KKK buddies in town. Go up there. Lock arms with your friends. Stay safe, but stay strong as well. Stay engaged in the debates of the day. Oppose racism. Run for office. Oh yes. And again, make sure to vote. If we use democracy, if we really use it, we can defend democracy. But at the moment, not enough of us are. Again, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. Thank you, Heather. And thank you, everyone who stood up to the right-wing terrorists in Virginia. You all came out to protect your city from these thugs, and they hurt you. You used different tactics in the fight, yes. But you stood up in solidarity against the hate. You stood up to the bullies of America, and you told them no. To those who stood up to the alt-right, you are heroes. You are more American than any of the cowards of the alt-right. You are more American than any of them. Maybe a new statue should be put in that park, in Emancipation Park. The people of Charlottesville. A monument to those who stood against the tyranny of hate. I think it would be a bit more historically significant than an old general man on a horse. I'm explicitly leaving out discussions of the other method to ending white supremacy and preventing it from forming a fascist ethno-state in America. It's the option that comes when democracy can't save us anymore. Some already believe we're there, and some believe that both are necessary at this point, that one must be put into use to defend the other. This is why there is a diverse range of tactics in play by those that oppose the alt-right white supremacist groups, and I won't condemn them for defending their right to exist, and neither should you. This is perhaps a lot for our first video, and understand that this will probably not get any views. After all, the channel's new, only one video, yeah. And that's okay. But I've gotten tired of having to repeat myself over and over again about that damn statue and the active deflection away from the hate groups of the Unite the Right. I don't know how often I'll put up videos here, but if you want to see more, make sure to hit the subscribe button to catch them when I do. There's a lot more I want to talk about, and could talk about, and should talk about, on these topics alone. I haven't even gotten to other accounts of the day the night before, like the outnumbered students surrounded by torch-wielding pretty boys, or the police who were hesitant to put themselves between the white supremacists and the locals. In the defense of the police, I've heard stated they recognized that they were just outgunned. And I could talk about dog whistle political speech at length. Hint, if someone's crying about fighting the Rothschilds controlling the world, they're talking about fighting the Jews. Just let that sink in, guys. We've all known a few folks that rage about the Rothschilds now and then. Now you know what they're talking about. But maybe I'll touch on coded language and other right-wing tactics meant to cast extremists as moderates another time. And I'm sure there are folks out there who are better at that than me. But I had to do something. I had to start something. And so I know this video is imperfect, and a bit rushed, and probably has some flaws. But I fear that if I didn't say what I had to say now, things will just get swept up in the next wave of stupid, and the opportunity to make a clear statement on what's going on now would be gone. Thank you for watching. I am Dr. L, and it ends with me.